Hey, what's up guys? I am Joe from Workbench, and this week we're going to talk about parallaxing 2D objects that appear to be 3D.
We're going to be talking about this parallax. As the buildings go across from side to side, you can kind of see the sides of the building. So they're kind of a faked 3D. So let's stop that. If I move it around here a little bit more slowly, you can see. At this point we can see both sides of these buildings, but if we move it over here, you can see that the center one is actually kind of square to us. It's a pretty simple technique, so let me show you how it's set up. Let's go into this house comp, go to 0 in the timeline. So you can see what we have here basically is our left extreme. So when this house is all the way in the comp on this side, this is what it'll look like. On the other end over here, we have what is at the right extreme. You can kind of see they flip-flop as we go by. And obviously in the center, we are at the center. So a lot of this is just moving paths around, but there's a couple of techniques that I've used that you can take advantage of to make this a little quicker. For one thing, a lot of these things can actually be duplicated and set behind their original, and then you can just slide them in position. Like in this case, the walls that I'm using on the sides are basically the same thing, darkened, and just shifted over. I've just left these houses flat to the ground, but if you want to maintain a perspective, you can also do that. You can see I've done that up here with a chimney. So while those things can slide out, anything that's actually supposed to be on this wall, like windows or these bricks in this example, are actually scaled in. You set the anchor point to be on the edge of the wall, and then you scale them as we go in time. To make the other side of this, you can just flip it in a lot of cases. So I'll just set a hold keyframe for scale, and then when we get to the middle point, we just flip it. Since that's usually behind everything, you don't see it, and then it scales back out from the other side. You might also have to do that with a position, hold the keyframe for that as well. These shingles were a little more annoying in this example. I didn't actually build the first one of these in this perspective. To do this one, I kind of figured out what these things were pointing at in the illustration and tried to maintain that as we went through in time. The ones on the edge are kind of easy, you just try to keep them to the edges. I knew the ones in the middle weren't really going to move at all, and the ones on the extreme side should slide toward their side as the thing rotates. Doing this with actual shapes and stuff is a little more tedious to set up, but it still looks pretty cool. And it allows you to make a look that you want without having to go into 3D to make that look. I didn't do it here, but if you want to do more complex lighting with this, where this side's like the dark side and this other side is even brighter, you can keep these colors as your base, and then keyframe the exposure effect on top of it. Another thing that you can probably do that I didn't because this doesn't go completely square, we still have these shingles and things in slight perspective. If these things are square to the camera, you can use the skew settings inside of the shape layer and just animate that. Another thing to note is that this house is resting on basically the bottom of the comp. I did that for convenience, because basically now I can set my anchor point to the bottom of this comp, and I can scale this, and since we're actually just going to sample where that point is, no matter what size this is, it'll still parallax properly as we go from left to right. Which is quite interesting because then you can actually have different sized buildings and they still look fine next to each other. Alright, so let's take a look at the expression. Alright, so this is the expression that we're using. All of these items are time remapped, and so this expression is added to time remap. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a variable called end, and in this case that equals 180 times this comp.frame duration. This 180 is how long our precomps are for our houses and the trees. So you're going to change that based on your setup. There's probably a way to actually grab this from the precomp itself, so if that's the case, I'll update this expression in the description. Alright, then our next line is x equals this.toWorld, this.anchorPoint, 0. So in this line, we check to see where the anchor point is in relation to the world. That also allows us to have it parented to a null, and it doesn't really change where it is. And so after we figure that, we're going to just grab the x position of that. Then we're going to use the linear function to change our output value as x changes. So we're going to do linear as x goes from 2052, which is this end of the comp, to negative 152, which is off the screen on this side. We're going to go from 0 to the end. So it's going to go from frame 0 to the last frame of the precomp. If for some reason your houses or whatever flip the other direction, just swap these two values. Or swap these two values. One or the other. So again, as we have this two world thing, we can put these on nulls or we can put them on their own and move them across the screen, whatever you want to do. It'll figure out its position and it'll adjust the frame accordingly. But what's also neat about that is that you don't have to just do this in 2D. You actually can do this with 3D objects as well. So I set up these trees the same way. I put a null in the middle and I parented a camera and I rotated it about 60 degrees so that they move across screen as well. So if we go back into the loop, move through slowly, you can kind of see that this stand of trees right here, there's no gap here, but toward the end a gap forms. So if you want to design your house in 3D or you want to put little cars or something out in front, you can just render them out with kind of a slight rotation and put them in here and do the same thing. I used on a project recently to make a 2D design of a house that somebody gave me into this kind of 3D version as it moves across the landscape. So I've already found a use for this, and I hope you will too. Alright guys, if you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments down below. If you'd like to help support what we do, check out patreon.com/workbench. Make sure you keep up with the blog at workbench.tv. And as always, I am Joe, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.